My name is Ryan Carter. I am 29 years old. 3 days ago, my mother called to tell me I was not invited to Christmas dinner. Not because there was not enough space. Not because I lived too far away. Not because we had argued. She said my sister's boyfriend would be meeting the family for the first time, and my presence would create the wrong impression. I was standing in my woodworking shop when the call came in. Sawdust covered my workbench. Half-finished furniture orders surrounded me. I had spent the entire morning building a custom dining table for a client. Then my mother casually explained why I should stay away from my own family gathering. "Emily wants everything to look perfect," she said. "You know how important first impressions are." I tightened my grip on the phone. "What exactly is wrong with me?" I asked. There was a long pause. Then she answered, "People might not understand what you do." I almost laughed. What I did? I owned a successful custom furniture business. My work appeared in luxury homes across 3 states. My clients included attorneys, doctors, and business owners. Yet somehow, to my family, I was still the disappointment. The son who spent his days in a workshop instead of sitting behind a corporate desk. The son whose hands showed years of hard work. The son they never seemed proud to introduce. I wish I could tell you I argued. I wish I could tell you I finally stood up for myself. Instead, I did what I had been doing for years. I stayed quiet. "Okay," I said. Then I ended the call. The shop suddenly felt much larger and much emptier. I looked around at everything I had built. Every machine, every tool, every customer order waiting to be completed. None of it had come from family connections. None of it had been handed to me. I built it all myself. Yet one phone call from my mother was enough to make me feel like the unwanted kid I used to be. The truth is, this was not new. My family had treated me differently for as long as I could remember. Emily was the golden child. She received praise for almost everything she did. When she succeeded, it was because she was talented. When she failed, it was because someone else held her back. Meanwhile, I was expected to solve problems quietly and ask for nothing in return. I fixed broken appliances. I painted rooms. I repaired fences. I moved furniture. If something needed to be done, everyone called Ryan. But when it came time for celebrations, recognition, or attention, suddenly nobody remembered my name. I still remember my sister's college graduation. My parents threw a huge party. They invited relatives from all over the country. My father stood in front of everyone and called Emily the future of the family. Meanwhile, I spent the entire evening carrying tables, setting up decorations, and cleaning afterward. Nobody thanked me. Nobody noticed. At some point, I stopped expecting them to. That was probably my biggest mistake. Because when people get used to your sacrifices, they start treating them like obligations. They stop seeing your value. They stop seeing you. That evening, I locked up the workshop and drove home. Christmas lights decorated every street. Families were gathering. Restaurants were crowded. The entire city seemed wrapped in celebration. Yet I felt completely alone. When I arrived at my apartment, I dropped onto the couch and stared at my phone. A few minutes later, a message appeared from Emily. It was a picture of her and her boyfriend smiling together. No invitation. No apology. Just another reminder that I was outside looking in. Then my mother sent a message showing the beautifully decorated dining room. Again, no mention of me. No acknowledgement that I had just been excluded from Christmas. It was as if they had already erased me from the family picture. I set the phone aside and sat in silence. The hurt was familiar. The disappointment was familiar too. But beneath both emotions was something else. Exhaustion. I was tired of working for approval that never came. Tired of proving my worth to people who had already decided what they thought of me. Tired of being useful when they needed help and invisible when they wanted recognition. What I did not know was that Christmas dinner would not unfold the way my family expected. Because while they were busy introducing Emily's wealthy boyfriend to the version of the Carter family they wanted him to see, that same man would soon arrive at my front door. And when he discovered who I really was, what I had built, and how much my family had hidden from him, the entire foundation of their perfect image would begin to crack. The morning after my mother's phone call, I arrived at my workshop before sunrise. Work had always been my escape. Wood, tools, measurements, and deadlines made sense. Family relationships never did. As I switched on the lights and looked around the shop, memories I usually kept buried began resurfacing. Maybe it was because my exclusion from Christmas finally forced me to see my life clearly. The favoritism had been there for as long as I could remember. Emily never had to earn attention. It simply arrived. If she wanted something, my parents found a way to make it happen. When she decided she wanted horseback riding lessons, they paid for them. When she wanted a newer car than most teenagers could dream of, they bought it. When she changed career plans 3 different times, my parents called it self-discovery. Every decision Emily made was treated like evidence of her potential. My choices were treated like problems to solve. When I told my parents I wanted to learn woodworking, my father laughed. He said talented students became lawyers or doctors, not carpenters. My mother worried what relatives would think. Even after I completed training, built my skills, and started attracting clients, they continued speaking about my work as if it were a temporary phase. They never understood that I loved creating something real with my hands. They never understood that success does not always wear a suit. Despite everything, I kept helping. Whenever my parents needed home repairs, I showed up. Whenever Emily moved apartments, I carried boxes. Whenever something broke, everyone called Ryan. I was useful, dependable, reliable. Yet somehow those qualities never translated into respect. Looking back, I realize I spent years confusing responsibility with belonging. Around midday, my phone rang. It was Grandma Rose. Unlike the rest of the family, she always asked how I was doing before asking what I was doing. "Your mother told me you are not attending Christmas dinner," she said. "I was not invited," I replied. The silence that followed was longer than usual. "Explain that," she said firmly. I told her everything. The boyfriend, the image concerns, the decision to leave me out. By the time I finished, I could hear anger in her voice. "Ryan, your family has spent years taking your kindness for granted," she said. "One day people become so comfortable benefiting from someone that they forget to appreciate them." I leaned back in my chair and stared across the workshop. "Maybe they never appreciated me to begin with," I admitted. Grandma Rose sighed softly. "That possibility hurts. But sometimes accepting the truth is the first step toward freedom." Her words followed me for the rest of the day. Freedom. I had never thought about my relationship with my family that way. What if constantly seeking their approval was actually keeping me trapped? What if I had spent years trying to earn something they were unwilling to give? The workshop remained busy. Customers stopped by to discuss projects. Contractors picked up furniture pieces. Several clients complimented my recent work. By every objective measure, my business was thriving. Yet my family still spoke about me as if I were a disappointment. That contradiction became harder to ignore with each passing hour. Later that evening, I made the mistake of checking social media. Emily had already uploaded photos from a family gathering. My parents stood proudly beside her and Ethan Brooks. Everyone looked happy, perfect, successful. There was no sign that another member of the family existed. No sign that someone had been intentionally excluded. I stared at the photos longer than I should have. Then I closed the application and set the phone aside. For the first time, I asked myself a difficult question. If these people were not related to me, would I continue fighting for a place in their lives? The answer came immediately. No. The realization was painful because it exposed how much energy I had wasted chasing acceptance. Still, I could not know that events were already beginning to shift. Because while my family focused on impressing Ethan Brooks, he was quietly noticing details that did not fit their story. Small inconsistencies, unanswered questions, missing pieces. And those missing pieces were about to lead him straight to my workshop and directly into the truth my family had spent years trying to hide. Christmas Eve arrived with freezing temperatures and bright winter sunlight. The town looked exactly the way holiday advertisements promised life should look. Families loaded gifts into cars. Restaurants filled with celebrations. Neighbors greeted one another with cheerful smiles. I spent the morning alone in my workshop finishing a walnut coffee table for a client. The steady rhythm of work helped keep my mind occupied, at least for a while. By midday, most businesses had closed. People were heading home to spend time with the people they loved. I cleaned my tools, swept the floor, and shut down the machines one by one. Normally, I would have been heading to my parents' house. Every year, I arrived early. Every year, I helped move furniture, carry decorations, and prepare for guests. Nobody asked me to do those things anymore. This year, nobody even wanted me there. The realization still felt unreal. On the drive home, Christmas music played on the radio. I switched it off. Silence felt easier. Back at my apartment, I made myself a simple dinner. Steak, baked potatoes, a bottle of soda. Nothing special, just enough to get through the evening. While I cooked, my phone continuously buzzed. The family group chat was active. Photos appeared every few minutes. The decorated dining room. Wrapped presents beneath the tree. Emily smiling beside Ethan. My mother showing off desserts. My father raising a glass during a toast. Nobody mentioned me. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody seemed to notice there was one less chair at the table. After staring at the messages for several minutes, I muted the conversation and set the phone aside. Then I sat down and ate dinner alone. The strange thing was that part of me actually enjoyed the quiet. For years, family gatherings had felt more like obligations than celebrations. I was always working while everyone else relaxed. Always helping while everyone else enjoyed themselves. This was the first holiday where nobody expected anything from me. It felt lonely, but it also felt honest. Around 6 o'clock, Grandma Rose called. "Merry Christmas, Ryan," she said warmly. "Merry Christmas, Grandma. How are you really doing?" she asked. I appreciated that she never accepted the automatic answer. Honestly, I am disappointed, but I think I am also tired of pretending this behavior is normal. Grandma Rose sighed. Good, because it is not normal. We spoke for nearly an hour. She told stories about my grandfather, about building things with his hands, about how people used to underestimate him because he worked with tools instead of paperwork. The funny thing, she said, is that everyone eventually respected him. They just took longer than they should have. Maybe my family will figure it out someday. Maybe, she replied. But do not put your life on hold waiting for it. After we ended the call, I felt calmer, more grounded. Yet curiosity eventually got the better of me. I opened social media. Emily had uploaded a collection of Christmas photos. One image immediately caught my attention. Ethan sat between my parents, smiling politely. The caption read, "Perfect Christmas with everyone who matters." I stared at the words longer than I should have. Everyone who matters. 4 faces. 4 people. Not 5. Apparently, my exclusion had become official. I closed the application and tossed the phone onto the couch. What I could not know was that Ethan had seen that same photo from a completely different perspective. Throughout the evening, he had noticed family pictures hanging on the walls. Some were old, some were recent, but something felt strange. There were references to a brother, occasional mentions of Ryan, yet very few photographs, very few stories, almost as if someone had intentionally been removed from the narrative. Ethan started asking questions. Where was Ryan? Why had he not attended dinner? What did he do for a living? Each answer seemed carefully rehearsed. Each explanation sounded incomplete. By the time Christmas night ended, Ethan Brooks no longer believed the story my family had told him. And when he woke up the next morning, he made a decision that would change everything. He was going to find me himself. The day after Christmas began quietly. I arrived at my workshop before sunrise, unlocked the doors, and started preparing for another day of work. The scent of fresh wood filled the air. Machines hummed softly as I reviewed project plans for several upcoming commissions. By mid-morning, I had almost stopped thinking about Christmas entirely. Then someone knocked on the workshop door. I looked up from my drafting table and immediately recognized the man standing outside. Ethan Brooks, Emily's boyfriend. For a second, I wondered if I was imagining things. Then he raised a hand and smiled awkwardly. "Ryan, that depends on who is asking." He laughed. "Fair enough. Ethan Brooks. I know who you are." I walked over and opened the door. "What brings you here?" Ethan stepped inside and glanced around the workshop. Massive slabs of walnut leaned against one wall. Finished furniture pieces stood throughout the space. Design sketches covered a corkboard near my desk. He looked impressed before we had even started talking. "Actually," he said, "I came because I have questions." That was not the answer I expected. "Questions about what?" Ethan hesitated. "About you." I folded my arms. "That sounds concerning." He smiled briefly. "Yesterday I noticed something strange. Your family talked about you like you barely existed." Every answer felt incomplete. I said nothing. "Then this morning I asked where you worked. And Emily told me you do handyman jobs." I stared at him. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. "Handyman jobs?" That is what she said. I turned and pointed toward a sign mounted above the office door. Carter Custom Furniture. Established 2019. Ethan followed my gaze. "You own this place?" "Yes." "You own the entire business?" "I do." The silence that followed lasted several seconds. Ethan looked around again, this time more carefully. "Nobody told me that." Clearly. He walked toward a finished dining table sitting in the center of the workshop. His fingertips brushed the edge. This is incredible craftsmanship. Thank you. How many people work here? Right now? 11. Ethan blinked. 11 employees? 12 if you count my office manager. He looked genuinely stunned. Ryan, your family made it sound like you struggled to hold a job. I leaned against my workbench. That narrative is easier for them. Ethan slowly shook his head. I do not understand. Neither do I. At that moment, the office door opened. My operations manager stepped out carrying paperwork. Ryan, the architect from Atlanta, approved the conference table design. They want the first shipment ready next week. She paused after noticing Ethan. Sorry, did I interrupt something? Not at all. Ethan looked between us. Conference table? Corporate headquarters project, I explained. One of several. My manager added. And do not forget the hotel order. They need 20 custom pieces before February. Then she disappeared back into the office. Ethan stood perfectly still. Hotel order? Yes. Corporate headquarters? Yes. Several. Also yes. He laughed once in disbelief. I think I have been told a very different story about you. I could not argue with that. Ethan walked slowly around the workshop. He examined framed magazine features hanging on one wall. Industry awards. Photographs of completed luxury projects. Every step seemed to reveal another fact my family had failed to mention. Finally, he stopped in front of a framed article from a regional business magazine. The headline featured my name. Ethan read it twice. Then he turned toward me. You are one of the fastest growing custom furniture companies in the state. According to that magazine. Ryan, why would your family hide this? I looked away for a moment. Because the answer was painfully simple. Maybe success only counts when it looks the way they expect. Ethan did not respond immediately. He simply stood there staring at the workshop, at the business, at the evidence surrounding him. For the first time since arriving, I saw something shift in his expression. Confusion was being replaced by understanding. The problem for my family was that this understanding had only just begun. Because once Ethan started pulling on loose threads, the entire story they had built around me was about to unravel. For several moments after discovering the truth about my workshop, Ethan simply stood there processing everything. Finally, he looked at me and said, Would you mind showing me around? I shrugged. Sure. We began walking through the facility. The workshop occupied nearly 10,000 square feet. Lumber storage filled one section. Production equipment occupied another. The finishing area sat near the back. Offices overlooked the main floor from a raised platform. Ethan examined everything carefully. This is much larger than I expected. Most people say that. Including your family? I laughed. They have never actually been here. Ethan stopped walking. You are kidding. I wish I were. He stared at me for a moment. Your parents have never visited? Not once. Even after all these years. No, the disbelief on his face was almost entertaining. We continued toward a display area showcasing completed projects. Photographs covered the walls. Luxury homes. Hotels. Restaurants. Corporate headquarters. Ethan paused in front of one particular image. I know this building. Which one? The Harbor Grand Hotel. We built all the custom furniture for their renovation. Ethan looked at me. That was a multi-million-dollar project. Correct. He moved to another photograph. And this? Law firm headquarters. Another. And this? Private residence. His eyebrows lifted. Ryan, these are not small projects. No. Then why does your family talk about your business like it barely exists? I had no answer for that question. At least not one that would make sense to anyone outside the family. We reached the conference room, where framed awards hung along the wall. Ethan stepped closer. State Manufacturing Excellence Award. Then another frame. Regional Small Business Leader of the Year. Then another. Top Custom Furniture Brand. He turned toward me. How many of these have you won? I do not know. Maybe 10. Ethan laughed in disbelief. Your sister told me you spent years struggling to find stable work. Apparently, she left out a few details. At that moment, my office manager entered carrying a folder. Ryan, the contract came through. She handed it to me before noticing Ethan. Sorry to interrupt. No problem. She left. Ethan glanced at the folder. The contract value printed across the top exceeded $300,000. He blinked. That is one order. Yes. One. Yes. Ryan, that is more than many people make in several years. It is a large commercial project. Ethan slowly shook his head. I genuinely do not understand your family. Neither did I. We walked into my office. Ethan sat across from my desk while I reviewed paperwork. After a few minutes, he asked a question that caught me off guard. Do you know who I am professionally? Other than Emily's boyfriend. He smiled. I own Brooks Hospitality Group. I looked up immediately. The name was familiar. Very familiar. The hotel company? Among other things. Suddenly, several projects displayed around the workshop made sense. Brooks Hospitality owned multiple luxury properties throughout the region. You are that Ethan Brooks? Apparently. I laughed softly. Well, now I understand why your name sounded familiar. And now I understand why your name sounded familiar. He pointed toward a magazine feature sitting on my bookshelf. I read an article about your company last year. You did. I remember because the craftsmanship stood out. Ethan leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. Ryan, I need to be honest. Go ahead. Your family talks constantly about success. That sounds accurate. But the most successful person I have met since arriving here is you. The room became very quiet. I did not know how to respond. Not because nobody had complimented my work before. Clients did that all the time. But hearing those words from someone completely outside the family felt different. It highlighted just how distorted my family's view of me had become. Ethan remained silent for several moments. Then he asked the question that would change everything. Ryan, if your family is so proud of appearances, why were you not invited to Christmas dinner? I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time, I realized he had no idea what kind of family he was dealing with. The answer I was about to give would change the way he saw Emily, my parents, and the entire Carter family forever. When Ethan asked why I had been excluded from Christmas dinner, I found myself staring at him longer than necessary. Part of me wanted to avoid the conversation entirely. Family dysfunction is difficult to explain to people who grew up in healthy households. Most of the time, the truth sounds unbelievable. Still, he deserved an answer. The short version? I asked. My sister did not want me there. Ethan frowned. That cannot be the whole story. Actually, it is. Ryan, people do not exclude family members for no reason. I almost laughed. You would be surprised. Ethan leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. Help me understand. I considered where to begin. Childhood, high school, college. There were too many examples. Too many years. Emily has always been the center of the family, I said finally. That was never the problem. Then what was? The problem started when I stopped fitting the role they assigned me. Ethan listened carefully, meaning I was supposed to be the dependable one, the helper, the background character. I paused. Nobody expected me to succeed. The words sounded harsh, but they were true. I told him about my early years. How relatives praised Emily's potential while questioning my choices. How my parents celebrated her achievements while treating mine as temporary. How every accomplishment seemed to make them uncomfortable rather than proud. Ethan's expression grew more serious with every story. You think Emily hid the truth about your business? He asked. I think she preferred the version of me that made her look more impressive. Silence settled between us. Then Ethan shook his head. Yesterday she described you as someone who never found direction. Interesting choice of words. Ryan, that is not normal. Neither is excluding your brother from Christmas. He could not argue with that. A few minutes later, I pulled an old photo album from a cabinet. Most of the photographs came from family gatherings over the years. I handed it to Ethan. He flipped through the pages slowly. Birthday parties, holidays, school events, family vacations. After several minutes, he looked up. Something feels strange. What? You are barely in these pictures. I nodded. Keep looking. He continued turning pages. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Emily occupied the center of nearly every memory. I was usually in the background carrying supplies, setting up decorations, or helping with tasks. This is unbelievable, Ethan said quietly. Now imagine living it. He closed the album and sat silently for several moments. Then he said something I had never heard from anyone outside the family. Ryan, I do not think they see you clearly. The statement hit me harder than expected. Not because it was cruel, because it was accurate. For years I had tried to become someone my family would respect. The problem was that they had already decided who I was. Every success I achieved simply conflicted with the version of me they preferred. Ethan stood and walked toward the workshop floor. Employees greeted me as we passed. Questions came from every direction. Delivery schedules, client approvals, design changes. Ethan observed the interactions quietly. Finally, he turned toward me. Everyone here respects you. I hope so. It is obvious. He glanced around the building. You built something remarkable. For a moment, I did not know what to say, because the people whose opinions mattered most had never said anything remotely similar. Eventually, Ethan prepared to leave. Before opening the door, he stopped. Can I ask one last thing? Sure. Why do you keep trying with them? The question lingered in the air. I thought about all the times I helped despite being overlooked. All the times I forgave behavior that should have ended relationships. All the times I convinced myself things would improve. Because they are my family, I said. Or at least I wanted them to be. Ethan studied my face for a moment. And now, I looked around the workshop. The business. The employees. The life I had built without their support. Now I am starting to realize family is supposed to make room for you, not erase you. Ethan nodded slowly. Then he left. I watched his vehicle pull away through the front windows. What I did not know was that he was driving directly toward my parents' house. And when he arrived, he carried a completely different understanding of the Carter family than the one he had arrived with on Christmas Day. Unfortunately for Emily and my parents, Ethan was about to ask questions they could not answer without exposing years of favoritism. The next evening, I was finishing paperwork in my office when my phone rang. Grandma rose. The second I answered, I could hear excitement in her voice. Ryan, she said, your family had a very interesting dinner tonight. I leaned back in my chair. That sounds dangerous. For your mother and sister? Absolutely. I smiled despite myself. What happened? Ethan came over. I assumed he would. Apparently, he arrived with several questions. I laughed. That never ends well around our family. Grandma Rose agreed. Dinner started normally. Your mother tried to impress him. Emily talked about herself. Your father mostly listened. Sounds familiar. Then Ethan asked how long you had owned your company. I immediately knew where this story was going. Let me guess. Your mother told him you did repair work. I covered my face with one hand. Unbelievable. Then Ethan corrected her. My head snapped up. Seriously? Very seriously. Grandma Rose sounded delighted. He told everyone about the workshop. The employees. The awards. The commercial projects. I could practically hear the panic spreading around the dinner table. What did Emily do? She claimed you had gotten lucky. I laughed. After 15 years of building a business? That was Ethan's reaction too. The image alone was satisfying. Not because I wanted revenge. Because someone was finally questioning assumptions my family had treated as facts. Grandma Rose continued. Then Ethan asked why you were not invited to Christmas dinner. The laughter disappeared immediately. And your family could not agree on an answer. Of course not. Your mother blamed scheduling conflicts. Emily claimed there was confusion. Your father said he assumed you had plans. I shook my head. 3 stories. Exactly. And Ethan noticed. Immediately. I could picture it perfectly. Ethan was not foolish. The moment multiple explanations appeared, the truth became obvious. Then things became quiet, Grandma Rose said. Very quiet. Why? Because Ethan asked why every explanation was different. I smiled slightly. That must have been uncomfortable. You have no idea. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then Grandma Rose said something that stayed with me. Ryan, tonight was the first time your family had to hear someone else describe what they were doing. I understood exactly what she meant. When dysfunction happens slowly, people become comfortable with it. They normalize behavior that would shock outsiders. Ethan represented that outside perspective. He was seeing the situation clearly. And once someone sees the truth, it becomes difficult to hide it again. There is something else, Grandma Rose added. What? After dinner, Ethan had a long conversation with your father. That caught my attention. About me? I believe so. My father was many things. Confrontational was not one of them. If Ethan had forced him into an honest conversation, it probably left an impression. How did Dad look afterward? Quiet, Grandma Rose said. More thoughtful than I have seen him in years. That surprised me. My father rarely questioned family dynamics. He usually chose the path of least resistance. If he was suddenly thinking, something significant must have happened. After hanging up, I sat alone in the office for a long time. Outside, employees were finishing their shifts. Machines had gone silent. The workshop felt calm. Yet something had clearly shifted. For the first time, someone outside the family had challenged the narrative. And instead of collapsing under scrutiny, the truth had held up remarkably well. The next morning, I arrived at work expecting another normal day. Instead, less than an hour after opening, I saw a familiar vehicle pull into the parking lot. My father stepped out. I had not seen him at the workshop in years. In fact, I realized something unsettling as I watched him approach the building. This might have been his first visit ever, and judging by the expression on his face, he was not there to admire furniture. He was there because the questions Ethan asked had forced him to confront something he had spent decades avoiding. The morning after my conversation with Grandma Rose, I was reviewing project drawings when my father walked into the workshop. Employees glanced up in surprise. Frankly, I was surprised too. In all the years I had owned the company, he had never visited. Not once. Yet here he was, standing awkwardly near the entrance and looking around as if he had entered a stranger's business. Maybe he had. "Dad, Ryan." The greeting felt unfamiliar. After a moment, I invited him into my office. He sat across from me and spent several seconds studying the room. Awards lined one wall. Project blueprints covered another. Through the office windows, employees moved throughout the workshop. "This place is incredible," he said finally. I almost laughed. "You are only about 5 years late discovering that." The comment slipped out before I could stop it. To his credit, he did not argue. He simply nodded. "That is fair." We sat quietly for a moment. Then he surprised me. "Ethan asked me some questions yesterday." I heard. Questions I should have been asking myself. I remained silent. My father looked down at his hands. "Ryan, I know very little about your life." The statement caught me off guard. "What?" "I know basic things. But I do not really know what you built here. I do not know your employees. I do not know your goals." His voice lowered. "I do not know who you became." That hurt more than criticism ever could. Because it was true. My father had spent years physically present but emotionally absent. We talked for nearly an hour. For the first time in my memory, he listened more than he spoke. He asked about the company, the projects, the challenges, the future. It felt strange, unfamiliar, almost like talking to someone who had suddenly realized he missed half my life. Then my phone rang. Emily. I ignored it. She called again, then again. Finally, I answered. "What? What did you say to Ethan?" she demanded immediately. I leaned back in my chair. "Hello, Emily. Do not play games." "I am not." Her frustration was obvious. "Ever since he visited your workshop, everything has changed." My father sat quietly, listening to every word. "I answered questions," I said. "That is all. You made me look bad." There it was. The sentence explained everything. Not concern, not regret, not accountability. Reputation, image, appearance. "No," I replied calmly. "You did that yourself." The line went silent. Then she disconnected. My father stared at the phone after the call ended. "Wow. Yeah." He rubbed his forehead. "I think I ignored a lot of things for a long time." "I think so too." Neither of us said anything else. There was nothing left to add. Reality was finally speaking for itself. Later that afternoon, another familiar vehicle arrived. Ethan. He walked into the workshop with the expression of someone who had already made an important decision. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure." We stepped into my office. Ethan closed the door and sat down. I ended my relationship with Emily. I blinked. "You what?" "This morning." "Because of our conversation?" "No," he shook his head immediately. "Because of what our conversation revealed." I waited for him to continue. "Ryan, I can handle mistakes. I can handle flaws. What I cannot handle is someone who intentionally diminishes another person for years and calls it normal." The room became quiet. The more questions I asked, the worse it looked, Ethan said. "Your success was hidden. Your accomplishments were minimized. Your exclusion was justified." He shook his head. "That is not a healthy family dynamic." Hearing someone summarize my entire childhood in a few sentences felt strangely validating. Then Ethan smiled. "There is one more reason I came." I was wondering. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on my desk. "Brooks Hospitality is expanding." I glanced at the documents. Then I looked up. "Ethan, hear me out. I am listening. We need custom furniture for 3 new luxury properties." My eyes moved back to the proposal. The numbers were enormous. Larger than any contract my company had received. "You are serious." "Very." Ethan smiled. "I prefer working with people who earn success instead of performing it." For several moments, I simply stared at the proposal. The irony was impossible to ignore. The family that spent years treating me like a servant had accidentally introduced me to one of the biggest opportunities of my career. And as I looked through the contract, I realized something important. The story my family had told about me was finally collapsing. The only question remaining was how they would react when they realized nobody believed it anymore. 6 months later, I stood inside the largest workshop expansion project our company had ever completed. New equipment filled the production floor. Additional employees moved between workstations. Orders lined the scheduling board weeks in advance. The contract with Brooks Hospitality Group opened doors I never imagined possible. One successful project led to another. Hotels recommended us to developers. Developers recommended us to architects. Before long, Carter Custom Furniture was operating at a level I once considered impossible. Yet the biggest change in my life had nothing to do with business growth. It was the realization that I no longer needed my family's approval. For years I chased something they could not give me. Respect that depended on meeting their expectations. Validation tied to their version of success. Once I stopped seeking those things, I became free. The months after Christmas transformed the Carter family. Ethan's departure forced difficult conversations. Questions nobody wanted to answer suddenly demanded attention. Grandma Rose became impossible to ignore. She openly discussed years of favoritism and unequal treatment. Relatives who once dismissed concerns started seeing patterns for themselves. My father changed the most. After visiting the workshop for the first time, he kept coming back. At first the visits felt awkward. We had years of distance to overcome. But slowly, something unexpected happened. We built a relationship based on honesty instead of assumptions. He learned about the company, met employees, attended project openings. One afternoon while walking through the workshop, he stopped beside a completed dining table and quietly said, "I should have been proud of this years ago." It was not a perfect apology, but it was real. Sometimes real matters more than perfect. Emily's journey was different. Losing Ethan forced her to confront realities she spent years avoiding. For a while she blamed everyone else. Then slowly, responsibility began replacing excuses. We never became best friends. Some relationships cannot instantly recover from decades of imbalance. But the hostility faded. The competition disappeared, mostly because I stopped participating in it. The strange thing about family rivalries is that they often survive only when both people keep feeding them. My mother struggled the most. She spent years building an image of the perfect family. Watching that image crack was painful for her. There were conversations, apologies, difficult moments. I accepted sincere efforts and ignored performative ones. Growth takes time. Accountability takes even longer. The person who surprised me most was Grandma Rose. One afternoon she arrived carrying a small storage box. Inside were newspaper articles, photographs, and certificates she had collected throughout my career. Every accomplishment, every milestone, every achievement. She had saved them all. I wanted someone to remember, she told me. Looking through those memories was emotional. For years I believed nobody noticed my work. Nobody cared. Yet Grandma Rose had quietly paid attention to every step. That realization changed something inside me. It reminded me that support does not always come from the loudest voices. Sometimes it comes from the people standing quietly in the background, believing in you long before success arrives. Looking back now, I see Christmas differently. At the time, being excluded felt humiliating. It felt like proof that I did not matter. But it turned out to be the moment everything changed. If I had attended that dinner, the truth might have remained hidden. Ethan would never have visited the workshop. My father would never have confronted reality. I might have spent years continuing the same exhausting cycle. Instead, one painful decision forced everyone to reveal who they really were, including me. Today, when I walk through my workshop, I do not see the boy who was treated like family labor. I see the man who built something meaningful despite being underestimated. I see employees supporting their families through careers created here. I see customers who value craftsmanship. I see a future built on respect instead of approval. If this story taught me anything, it is that other people's opinions cannot define your worth unless you hand them that power. Being overlooked does not make you insignificant. Being underestimated does not make you incapable. Being treated like a servant does not make you less valuable than anyone else. Sometimes the greatest success comes from finally seeing yourself clearly after spending years viewed through someone else's expectations. My parents once treated me like I existed to serve the family. Today, I run a thriving company, build relationships based on mutual respect, and live a life I genuinely enjoy. And that has become more satisfying than any approval I ever chased.